The Bookface Fundraiser project uses a custom data class with private variables that are accessed through public properties, a constructor to create new instances of the data class, and methods to do things within the class. We'll also review using a list as a collection for instances of the data class. We'll read-write comma-separated value data, and we'll use LINQ, language integrated query, to sort the list. The premise of this project is that the local library volunteer group, the Bookface group, sponsors an annual gala fundraiser. And the members of that group, the volunteers, take it upon themselves to raise funds and sell tickets. Each member is asked to sell tickets at $30 each, approach businesses and individuals to give auction items, and also request additional donations to the library. They want an application that will track the totals of the number of tickets sold and the value of those tickets at $30 each, the number of auction items, the total value of those auction items, and the total donations to get an idea of the preliminary total this fundraiser can raise. Now, obviously, the silent auction items may increase that considerably. On the left-hand side is a list box that allows us to look at how much each person has raised in terms of the tickets sold, auction items, the value, and additional donations. And we can click on any one of those items. We can also make changes to those items over on the right-hand side by putting in a new value of tickets or additional tickets sold, additional auction items and the value, and additional donations. And the update button will add these items to what is currently there. It'll also reflect the total values for the entire group. The volunteer group also gives some prizes to the top 3 fundraisers, and so we're going to use LINQ then to also create a sublist of these sorted by the amount raised and list the top 3. Unless there's a tie, there might be more than 3. And so that is our project. I created the data for this project in an Excel spreadsheet and then exported it as a comma-separated value text file named members.csv. I provide that file to you in the Canvas course site. You'll want to take that file and put it in the bin debug.net Windows subdirectory of your project folder. That way your executable file will be able to find it very easily. It'll be in the same folder as that executable that we'll create. And in Canvas, I also provide the Bookface group logo that's in the top of the form in a picture box. Here are the assignment instructions discussing the alignment of the project to our course competencies and to the topics of this week. Screenshot of the project. Description of the assignment. Listing of the assets provided in our Canvas course site. The storyboard, I'll give you a larger view of this in a minute. The design of our fundraiser class. And I used a UML, Unified Modeling Language class diagram to present the properties of the class. They are public and the private underlying variables. 2 of those, first last and last first, are read-only and do not have underlying variables per se, but it uses both the first in and last in variables in creating those. Then there are some public methods as well for calculating the funds, the total funds, and updating the tickets, auction items, auction value, and donations, as well as one to write each member's record back out to the data file. And then some step-by-step instructions on how I created the project. Make sure you put the members.csv file in your bin debug net 8.0 Windows folder, or it might be a different version of net Windows folder. Create your class level variables. Code the form load event to read the data from that members.csv data file. Remember to close your data file when you're done reading. And then create a sorted list of all those, because the data is not sorted to begin with. And we want to sort them by last name first, and then add those instances to our members list, as well as the LST members list box. And then we'll call a method called update totals. I put all that in try catch because sometimes reading a data file is where things go wrong. I want to catch that and let the user know that something went wrong. Then we want to update the totals. Remember to use C2 for those that are currency based. And then we want to find the top 3 members. So I'm going to create another copy of that list, sort it using link for the funds raised property in descending order, and show the top 3. And if the 4th, 5th, 6th, whatever is tied with that third person, then I'm going to also add them to the list. Normally there'd be 3 unless there's a tie for that third spot. We want to create code to handle the selected index changed for the LST members list box. And then the update button in the bottom right will take the text from those 4 text fields and add those to the existing values in the members instance, and also update our totals. And then finally, whenever we make changes, we also want to persist our data. So we're going to create a persist data method that will overwrite the old members.csv file with the new data. Make sure that you add that header file down that first line, otherwise you will lose that first record of data. And we want to test and debug. In testing, make sure that you make some changes to the data, close the application, open it back up, and verify that those changes have actually been recorded to the data file, so we know that the data persists. Here is the storyboard for the application. I'm going to suggest you pause the video here and create this. Try to code this on your own with maybe the help of a little bit of code that I gave you. But if you need further help beyond that, come back and I'll show you my code review. I'm going to start coding the project by creating my data class. And to do that, I'm going to go to my solution, right-click on it, and choose Add Class. And by default, it comes up with class1.vb. I'm going to change that class1 to be fundraiser.vb. I'll click the Add button. You get an empty public class fundraiser file, but in this case, I've already added the code here. So the way I add data is all of the class level variables are at the top. These are also referred to as fields, and these are all private. This is the encapsulation of our data. Now, coming from another language such as C#, oftentimes our private fields are the same name as our public properties, and the difference being the private fields are lowercase and the public properties begin with an uppercase letter. But Visual Basic is not case sensitive, so therefore they'd be the same, and we'd get errors. Our private variable names must be different than our property names. So I have a mixture here of string variables and integer variables and double variables. One of these is going to be a calculated variable that is not passed from our form. Then I have my constructor, and the constructor simply is the way that we create new instances and we pass data to the class from the calling form. And in this case, I'm passing the first name, last name, the number of tickets, the number of auction items, the auction value, and the donations as by value parameters, and the argument values of those then go into our private variable values. But to access those values publicly from our form, we're going to use properties. And so here are the properties. So we use property and the name of the property and then the data type that it is. So in this case, property first name is a string property. And we use what's called getters and setters. The getter gets the value that's currently there, and the setter allows us to change the value or apply a value to that underlying field. We're applying it as our property value. We have a get where we're going to return the underlying variable, and a set where we're passing it a value as string, and we're going to assign that value to the underlying variable. I do the same thing for last name, tickets sold, auction items, auction value, donation raised. Those are all my property names. And fundraised. Then I have 2 that are read-only properties. We're not going to set these properties, and there's no underlying variable per se on these. Rather, we're returning the mixed value of 2 of our variables. So last first returns the last n property, or the last name, comma, and then the first name, or first n variable. The first last does first n space last n. Next, we have some methods, things the function can do. So one of those is to calculate the funds. We're going to take the number of tickets sold by that person, multiply it by 30, and add in the auction values and the donations to get how much funds they have raised. We saw in the discussion in the storyboard that we have text boxes to update the tickets, the auction items, the auction value, and the donations. And so those next four methods simply do that. We take the value from the text box, passing it to these methods as integers or doubles, and then incrementing the underlying variable, tickets, auction I, auction V, or donations. And we're also going to change the raised value to whatever the calc funds. So we're calling that calc funds method internally. Even though it's public, we're treating it as private in this case, but we may want to use that publicly in our form. So the difference between private and public is private is only accessible within the class, public is accessible outside of the class. Makes sense. Then public function write records CSV is going to write each of these instances back out to our data file as a comma separated value. And so I create a string using interpolation of each of the underlying variables that are comma separated. We don't need to record the raised because that is calculated. And we return that string then to the calling statement to write the records back out. That's our data class. Let's jump over to the form. In the form, I begin with some class level variables, including a list of type Fundraiser named members that will contain all of our data. And then I made a reference to the data file as a string. I'm going to use that both in reading and writing, so it just makes sense to make it a class level variable. And that way, if I want to change that file that we're reading, I just change it here in one place. And then I have a integer variable called cellMem that stands for selected member, and I set it equal to -1. This is the member that's selected in the ListBox, and we're going to use that as our index number in retrieving data as well as updating the data. On the form load, I want to start by reading in my data file, which is located in the same directory as this executable. I'm going to create a stream reader and create a temporary list of type Fundraiser, and I'm going to clear anything in my members. Now, there isn't really anything in the members, but sometimes you might want to do this outside of a form load. So when we do that, we want to clear our instances of our data class. I'm going to do this in a try-catch simply because things can go wrong in reading data. That data could be corrupted. The data file may no longer exist there. It might have been renamed. So I'm going to use a try-catch to ensure that the data we get is correct. I'm going to open up my stream reader as a text file, and I pass it that data file class level variable. I'm going to create an array of fields holding 6 values. So it's an array of upper index of 5. Each record of my data file has 6 fields in it. I'm going to read the first line, which is the header, and I'm going to ignore that first line, so I'm not doing anything with it, just make sure I read it. And then in a do while loop, I'm going to use sr.peak to make sure we're not at the end of the file. So sr.peak does not equal -1. I'm going to read each line in one at a time and split it on the commas using the split command and place those into my fields array. Then I'm going to add a new Fundraiser using those different fields into my temp list. And on the fields 2 and 3, indexes 2 and 3, I'll make sure I convert those to integers. And on indices 4 and 5, make sure I convert those to double. When I'm done reading that file, I'm going to close it. And then I want to sort that temp list by last first. So that'll be the last name, comma, first name. The data initially is not sorted, although once we sort it and write it back out, it should be sorted from then on. But this is how you would sort an unsorted list. So I'm going to use link to do that. Dim temp sorted equals from XYZ is Fundraiser in temp, order by XYZ.last first, and select XYZ. That'll select all the records. And then for each FR stands for Fundraiser, in temp sorted, I'm going to add those items to my members class, passing it fr.firstname, fr.lastname, and so forth. I'm going to iterate through that members list and pull each member and add that to my ListBox items. So lstmembers.items.add, and I'm adding xyz.firstlast. They'll be sorted alphabetically by last name, but I'm going to show them as first name, last name. Then I'm going to call a method called update totals. That's going to, again, iterate back through our list and calculate the total number of tickets sold, the total number of auction items, and so forth. Then I have as my catch just that something went wrong. So if I couldn't open the data file or something else went wrong, we'll show the message of that exception, and the title will be something went wrong in our message box. The update totals. I'm going to set 4 values of ticks, A items, A value, and donations to 0 or 0.0. And then I'm going to iterate through my list of members and increment all those by the tickets sold property, the auction item sold property, the auction value, and the donations raised properties. I'm going to display those in my labels in the upper right-hand corner. Next, I want to find who the top fundraisers are. So I'm going to create, again using link, top raisers as from XYZ as fundraiser in members. Order by xyz.funds raised, that's the total funds that each member has raised, but I want it in descending values, so the highest values are at the top. And then select XYZ. I'm going to clear that LST top raisers items list, and I'm going to add the first 3 items from the top raisers list. So 0, 1, and 2. Now, if it happens to be element 3 or element 4, maybe are tied with element 2, I'm going to list those as well. So I have a little loop here. It's going to say for I as integer equals 3 to 29. So it's going to be the indices. And if that top raiser of element I, funds raised, equals the top raiser's element 2 dot funds raised, then I'm going to show them. If it's not, I'm going to exit that little loop. User can select an item in LST members. I'm going to handle the selection index changed event. And all we're doing here is showing the different values of the properties of that selected member in the fields in the bottom group box. On the right-hand side, we have some update text boxes. So the update button, we're going to handle that, where it's going to take those values, and we're going to call the update tickets, update auction items, update auction value, and update auction donations methods of our fundraisers class, and pass it the values that are in those text boxes. Now for the bottom 2 being currency, there's a temptation maybe to put a $ in front of those. So I created a little method here called clear dollar that simply replaces the $ with a null string, and then I also trim off any spaces. I want to update the items on the right-hand side of that bottom group box. So I'm going to change the selected index to a -1, so nothing selected, and then come back and reselect that selected mem class level variable. Now I didn't need to do that dim sm as integer equals select mem. I can just do lst members.selected index equals cell mem. I want to update my totals again, and I also want to, anytime I make changes, I want to persist the data and write it back out. So we have a method called persist data, and here is that method. We're going to create a stream writer. We're going to take our data file and use file.create text that's going to overwrite the data that's there. We don't want to use append text because it's going to add to it. So we're going to use create text. I'm going to write the first line out as that data header that we read in up at the top, and it's first name, comma, last name, comma, tickets sold, auction items, auction value, and donations. I want to make sure I do that because next time I read in, if that's not there, it's going to read that first line, not do anything with it, and I lose that first line of data. So we're going to be consistent. Since it starts with a header, make sure we add a header. And then I'm going to iterate through members, and for each fundraiser in members, we're going to call that write records CSV method that returns a string of those 6 data items, comma delimited, and write that to our data file using sw.writeLine. And make sure we close the data file. Well, let's just test this. When I start the application, it loads all the data from the members.csv file, populates the book face members, shows the top 3 fundraisers, and shows the totals for the group. I can click on any member and see that member's totals. So let's make a change to this one to make sure our data persistence works. Right now, Christina Chamberlain has sold 4 tickets. Let's add 2 more. And we're going to add in another auction item worth another $25. and we'll do a donation of 40. So we're making changes to all of these. I'm going to click Update. We see those changes reflected here. I'm going to close the application, reopen the application. We can see now that that new data is reflected in the choice of Christina Chamberlain. If you just jumped into this video, you can see all the videos from the Programming Practicum playlist by clicking on the image in the lower right. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos I create, you can click my picture in the top right to subscribe to the channel.